The main character of the story was Anton, a dealer who went to the mountain alone that year to import medicinal herbs. He arrived in Damgon village, which was located deep in the mountains and had extremely inconvenient traffic. This was a location that produced high-quality medicinal herbs, but due to transportation issues, very few people came to pick up the goods. As a result, the price of medicinal herbs was quite low here, and it met Anton's criteria. The people here were very welcoming, and when Anton arrived from elsewhere to buy medicinal herbs, the village chief immediately exhorted the people in the village to arrange for him to stay. It only took them a few minutes to find an empty house in the village for Anton to rest. Not only that, the villager chief also requested that his wife prepared a lavish dinner for him. The village chief then quickly left. When he arrived at the gate, he abruptly turned his head and told Anton not to go out at night. The village chief's statement piqued everyone's interest. Anton, on the other hand, didn't think much of it, quickly packing his bags and eating dinner. After a long day, Anton dozed off as soon as he sat down on the bed. The countryside, particularly in the mountains, had a very quiet atmosphere. The cool breeze also caused Anton to fall asleep gradually. He had no idea that something horrible was about to happen to him. At exactly midnight, a woman's pitiful cry could be heard from outside, and that sound jolted Anton awake. Despite the low volume, the cry created a sense of anxiety and insecurity in the listener. Anton stood up and wanted to go outside to see what was going on. The crying could clearly be heard coming from the courtyard, but when Anton went outside, there was no one there and the crying ceased. He was about to return to the house to sleep when he heard another cry from the back of the house. The cry was sad, but also spooky and strange. After going around the house, Anton came to a halt in front of the yard's corner, where a well was located. At the time, there was a woman crying on the edge of the well. Anton couldn't see the woman's face clearly because it was dark and she had her back turned, but her crying was heartbreaking. Anton, moved by pity, approached slowly to inquire about her story and console the poor girl. However, Anton was taken aback when he placed his hand on the woman's shoulder because the woman's body was extremely cold. The woman turned her head with a ghostly smile before Anton could react. Her face was haggard and pale, and her eyes were deep, and she didn't appear to be a regular person. Anton was afraid to scream loudly, so he turned to flee, but the woman caught him by the wrist. Due to the ghost's control, Anton was so terrified that his face turned pale and he felt a sharp pain in his wrist, the ghost's hand hooking into his skin. Anton jumped up, realizing it was all a dream. As a result of the intense pain, his face was still filled with fear at this point. Anton tried to remain calm and reassure himself that this nightmare could have been caused by being overtired. At the same time, Anton felt a sharp pain in his wrist, looked up and saw 5 black fingerprints. In the dream, he was also grabbed by the witch's arm. However, when Anton looked around, he was astounded to see that the door was open and that some footprints stretched from the bed to the floor. Convinced that there was a thief in the house, Anton quickly glanced at the money bag next to him, which remained in the same position without moving. So who left a trace? Despite his fear, Anton was still curious about this to find out what had happened. He followed the trail of black footprints. As he walked behind the house, a gloomy atmosphere began to emerge. Anton's heart began to have a bad premonition as well. There was a well in front of Anton now, just like in a dream, except there was no ghost sitting on the well's wall and no ghostly cry. Anton had a feeling what he had just witnessed was more than a nightmare. Everything had to be related to the well in front of him. So Anton summoned his courage to walk towards the well, then placed his hand on the well wall and crawled inside to investigate. Anton saw nothing but dense water at the bottom of the well. The water surface, on the other hand, was constantly rippled as if something was about to happen. Just as Anton was about to return inside, a figure in the water appeared out of nowhere. If you looked closely, you could see that it was a woman's silhouette. When he saw the terrible scene in front of him, Anton's face darkened instantly. He screamed in fear and then backed away slowly due to inertia. When he stayed back, he ran into someone, quickly turned around, and Anton recognized the person was the village chief. The village chief's appearance at this moment was like Anton's savior. Anton hurriedly informed the village chief of his dream of a ghost and followed her in their footsteps to the strange well. Anton was then reassured by the village chief and led into the house. The chief began to tell him a story after he had calmed down. 7 years ago, a merchant who purchased medicinal herbs came to the village and was warmly welcomed. He was able to purchase medicinal herbs from the villagers at a reasonable price. However, after he left, everyone discovered that the money they had received was all counterfeit. Pam was one of the people who sold him medicinal herbs. He didn't want to be screwed after 2 years of hard work collecting herbs, so he went to the merchant's house to get his money back. However, 3 years had passed and Pam had not returned. When the villagers learned that he had died in a foreign land, Pam's wife couldn't take it any longer and jumped into the well to commit suicide. When the village chief finished telling the story, Anton felt a pang of sympathy, but no less fear. So the woman he met in his dream had to be Pam's wife. Suddenly, the village chief pulled a wooden stick from his belt, and a few villagers with knives and sticks burst in through the door, asking Anton to let them check his bag. Anton immediately refused, but the villagers eventually subdued him. A villager handed over his money bag to the village chief. When the village chief and some young men took the money from Anton's bag, they discovered it was all counterfeit. When his deception was exposed, Anton began to cry, pleading with the villagers to spare him. Of course, the villagers were unconcerned by his words. They despised scammers because of what happened to them 7 years ago. The village chief was the most enraged because he was Pam's father. He swung his wooden stick angrily at Anton, imagining his son being murdered by scammers. Anton was hit in the head with a stick before he could react. The stick immediately struck his head, splattering blood everywhere. In fear, Anton begged the village chief, but he was now completely transformed into a different person. He approached Anton slowly by an enraged expression. It appeared that the village chief was attempting to avenge his son by killing all of the scammers. He raised his stick again and struck Anton hard on the head. After being knocked unconscious, Anton was ruthlessly thrown off the cliff by the villagers. Anton miraculously avoided death. He then reported the incident to the police and was sentenced to prison for using counterfeit money. Those people who were with murder plots in Damgon village were also punished by law.